Noah, a Northwestern student, and Pete, a Northwestern graduate, founded the Neuron, a newsletter focused on AI that has exploded to over 425,000 readers. As always on UNinvested, we dive into the truth on how young entrepreneurs, tech innovators, and VCs make it. Why did the Neuron blow up? Pete, I know you've been writing on LinkedIn for a while, you have a mass following, and Noah, you mentioned in a previous podcast that you've been writing, since you were 15. So why did the Neuron gain the success that it has compared to everything else you guys have done?
So we started in January 2023. Obviously an insane year for AI. But just to lay out the timeline, ChatGPT launches end of November 2022. It's then comes December, and so it's like half of it's a holiday. People don't really know what's going on. And then January is like peak. Oh my goodness, we're like off to the races when it comes to AI stuff. And so I think it was in a moment where truly I don't think anything else has captured the public attention as much as AI in the last like 10 years. I think I would say the last boom was like this crypto thing, but that was like very clearly only like a subset of the population that would like latch onto that. This was truly cross-cutting. And so I think we just jumped on it between the two of us. I have a technical enough background to understand what's going on here. I certainly have the business background to understand the impact on people's lives and how to communicate that. And then Noah has so much experience writing really engaging content, right? And so I think the two together provide a really useful skill set to kind of chase after such a big topic like this.
A huge intention for us in the beginning of 2023 was to really craft a brand and voice that would make people feel comfortable and prepared when it came to AI, and not necessarily chase clicks in the early days. So to answer your question, I think brand was really important in the early days for why we received so much traction. We spent the first few months of building the company really honing in on what is our actual approach to crafting content in a way that resonates with people who are looking for answers and people who are consuming media and educational products.
So bring me to the early days. Noah, I was reading, I think you mentioned it in a previous conversation that, you met Pete through mutuals at Northwestern. And, within a week, I think, of your first conversation, you guys kind of launched the Neuron. What really led to that, first few weeks of success, like immediate success almost?
So we'd actually linked up initially mid 2022, I believe. And that was our first initial call. I think there were a couple of weeks where we were actually like not fully sort of deciding on working together yet. And so a lot of the initial very, very early like V01 sort of versions of the brand and all that kind of stuff, I was chopping up on Canva, and it was like, it looked terrible. But, the early things like the cat theme and all that kind of stuff were sort of getting into place. When we first started working together, it was very much like, we just need to like get into the groove of things, right? Like one of the first things we did was just like, okay, let's just like try collaborating on this for a week and just getting into the schedule of it and really understanding what the content angle is. As we sort of understood what was standing out at the time and what other people were doing, we really honed in on this angle, this particular voice that we were going for. On Beehive alone, the email platform that we use, there were, by their count in 2023, 2,500 AI newsletters that started on Beehive alone. How many of them had ChatGPT summarized article summaries? How many of them had robot, brain, computer themed things? How many of them had just like virtually indistinguishable, basically zero commentary, like real commentary from like a real person? Like all of them pretty much. And even in the set that has sort of like broken out, like in our peer set today, you will still see that, right? Like you will still see the majority of the people who are writing the newsletters, they like give you a link in a ChatGPT summary or something that basically came out of ChatGPT. And I think very early on, we were like, okay, no, we need to like have a voice here and have a personality into what we think. Like, what are we reacting to? What do we like? Like, what do we think is a good move, a bad move? What is our sense of humor with this? And so a lot of the early weeks, as far as I recall it, is figuring that out. And just like, as we put it all together, as we react to the news, we sort of come together of just like, what exactly is this voice that we're developing? Anyone can get any information anywhere, right? Like if you really like just search on Google or whatever it is, but like, how do you become someone's preferred place? and someone that feels like a relatable source, right? Like these sorts of things start to come into play a little bit more.
It seems that newsletter after newsletter, you're iterating, reminds me of a startup doing the lean startup methodology. So in your mind and your thought, when did you hit product market fit for your newsletter? When you thought you solidified your brand, how you write, the content you're pushing?
I think the voice naturally found its place in the first few months. And I had experience writing in a similar voice for other newsletters. So there wasn't that much iteration I actually needed to do there. And I described it as being not actually that hard for me to write in that voice because it's similar to how I talk. Like when I have thoughts that form in my head, I just put them down into Beehive. And that's how it turns out. It's harder for me to write in a more formal journalistic-y way than it is for me to just write how I talk. So that's the first thing. The second thing was the actual structure and style of the newsletter. One big change we made to the newsletter content at the end of last year is shifting from 2 shorter stories to one longer story. The reason we did that is because we have a feedback mechanism from readers where every day they respond to how they rated the newsletter, and we get hundreds of people every day to respond to that. And that's really useful because we get to hear what people are saying day after day. It's a very rapid feedback loop. And one of the things we kept hearing over and over was, we want more of what you're talking about, and not necessarily of everything you're talking about, but the most important thing of that day, we want more context and we want more commentary from you. And so what I've started doing earlier in 2024 is going deeper on one story every day. And that's something that naturally led itself to a podcast, which is doing something similar to the newsletter, but going even deeper. He actually spending 15 minutes talking about the same topics we're sometimes mentioning in the newsletter, but going much deeper on the why it matters.
Your comparison to how early stage startups operate is sound, but I think because we're dealing with content, it actually is sort of different in how it manifests. So the general cycle is this, which is, look, listen to your users, and at the very minimum, if you have a very well-grounded understanding of what your users want, then look at the thing that you're building and be like, is this good? Just ask the question, is this good, right? And that's what software companies do. That's what content people should do. The difference is, well, there's 2 things that happen, which is one, people in content, especially in these small teams like ours, get so used to writing the same thing over and over again that they forget to do that exercise. And so that's how you come away with these newsletters where, as the news cycle has changed, this time last year, the news cycle was completely different. There were 10 new product announcements every day, basically. And it was all about these new tools. Now there's way less of that, right? Now we're really starting to let the implications of all these things sink in a little bit more. People are asking deeper questions. People are asking how-to questions, not just what is happening questions. And so what happens is a lot of this iteration that we're doing is simply, is this a good product for the current moment? Is this actually helping people understand what's going on? And meanwhile, you have a lot of people who are just look, I'm just going to plug and chug news. And so they have all these random headlines that are oh, here's AI in medicine, AI in robotics, AI and here's some ChatGPT update. And it's scattershot. And yes, maybe there are some people who are interested in just seeing every single moment where the words artificial intelligence is mentioned. But most people, I don't think, actually get a lot from that. They read that, they're kind of okay, this just feels like a random collection, and that it's you just search the word AI and then you just pulled whatever came in here. The second thing is, because the product that we're doing is content versus software. Software is oftentimes replacing or modifying a long-standing workflow that doesn't change very often. So let's say you have a business process where you're okay, every day I have to go to this website, I have to copy and paste these things, I have to go email this person, whatever it is. Then your iteration is to make the product as good as you can in solving that problem. But that problem is pretty stable, right? That problem process exists in that form for a long time. With content, the problem changes. As people's digestion of a topic changes, as the news cycle changes, all that kind of stuff, it changes. So even though you're asking the same questions, the amount of times that you end up changing fundamentally what you're offering is more often in content and in media, or at least that's the way we think it should be, because it's sort of, in a fast-moving place like this, right? People's reactions are all over the place. You kind of have to be willing to adjust to where people are in the cycle.
You do really content creators for a lot of people when it comes to their AI, almost 500,000 people. So the people creating the content, where do you get your news and information to create the newsletter? Where are you getting your updates from? Is it Twitter, X? That's one of my favorite ones.
My approach is figuring out who are the people who really know their shit. The latest releases, the latest demos, the latest research. A lot of those people are hanging out on X and Reddit. And so that's where I find a lot of the insights. And when it comes to regular news and product announcements, a lot of that is coming from the actual companies themselves. So when we're writing about GPT 4.0 coming out, we're actually going to go to OpenAI's blog and Twitter announcements and see what they're saying.
What are the creators' names you said you were mentioning? Like, who knows their shit?
A lot of them are anonymous on Reddit and X.
I was going to say one other thing is, for a lot of people, we're in the business of curating and then also translating. That is our source of value for a lot of our readers. Curating is very easy, right? Like curating is, you technically could just like copy and paste 5 links and you're called the curator, right? The translating part is harder, which is you really have to have a good gauge of what level your audience is at, and like at what sort of like, so what do they care about? So for example, if there's a piece of research around context length, I know the first thing that we're gonna have to explain is what context length even is. Why does it matter? Like it's that level of filtering. And so simply reporting out that like context length is now 1 million tokens, whatever, is like fine, but like really, really, what does that mean? Right. And so that's a lot of the interesting part as we go through it is, there are a lot of people who are like really deep in this stuff, and that's like really fun. But then we always have this like filter in our minds of just like, okay, what's the angle? Like what's the specific thing that actually like matters to the audience here?
This next question, your answer might have changed if I asked you this 6 months ago to now. Do you write the Neuron for the love of AI, a passion of AI, or do you write the Neuron for a passion of content creation?
I grew up absolutely hating attending classes in school, but I realized in high school that I really loved learning. And part of my mission and motivation for all of this is to teach other people around me about the things that I find really important in life. And that might be AI, that might be crypto. So I really enjoyed the 2 things that you just mentioned. AI for me is the most important topic right now to be teaching people about. It's such an important point in AI's development, where these are the next few years where it's really going to be touching people in really integral ways in their lives and in their work lives. And so I enjoy creating content to help people navigate this changing landscape. So it's definitely a combination of both of the 2.
Hey, what about you?
It's both, right? Like I think the AI thing, I studied a little bit of it in undergrad. I did my master's in CS, and honestly, I put it away. I wasn't really fond of studying CS, and sort of went on to do businessy things afterwards and all that kind of stuff. I still view it through that lens. So whenever there's like a platform shift, whenever there is like a huge technological shift underway, that is just interesting. The content creation piece, I get a kick out of the moment where people are like, yeah, like that was clear. And that helped. You know what I mean? Like that is a very good feeling to chase after, And so I think like we're very alike in that sense. And so I think like as we've pushed each other to really obsess about content quality, we're like generally on the same page about that, right? Like when I ask Noah or Noah asks me, like, what is the angle? I know what he means, and he knows what I mean. And that's the bar. And we know sort of that there is a level of content that is like not acceptable in our eyes, that doesn't really help. So I think a lot of it is, both of this is sort of like an interesting mix of the 2 that allows us to do this particular thing in this particular moment in time.
And my next question shifts gears a little bit, but a lot of young people our age really want to put themselves out there, but they're shy or they're afraid. What is your advice to them? Noah, when you're in college right now, there's a lot of societal pressures. Maybe people are like, what are you doing? You have to avoid the parties. You got school going on. Pete, probably we're experiencing the same thing when you're putting yourself out there, building up your LinkedIn presence. What's your advice to those people that shy or afraid, or maybe they're just starting to put stuff out there?
Noah, how many years is there between us? There's like 9 or 10 years. 10 years, yeah, which is interesting, right? So I'm 30. I started doing content like 2-3 years ago, so like 27, 28. And I think depending on your professional background, yeah, of course, there's like a bunch of this like weird social stigma. especially on LinkedIn, by the way, right? Like all of your former bosses, your former classmates, all these things, like feels like a lot of people are like watching you on this sense. It's a funny moment in content because like people really, really, really overestimate the amount of time and attention that other people are placing on you. It feels very exposing to kind of post something online and have people read it and like all that kind of stuff. But like, you know, in someone else's day, you are a passing moment and they know that you posted, and the most they'll say is, hey, cool, I saw that post you made on LinkedIn. But like, it's not really like I'm hardcore judging you either way for it, frankly. It's just like, cool, you're like participating. You're like one of the people participating in like my online feeds now. And it's hard to get to that point to accept that. But really what it comes down to is like the journey is always the same. It's always the same no matter how comfortable you are, like being outspoken on the internet. The first 1 to 5 times you put something out on the internet will be incredibly painful. You will obsess over the first article, the first post. You want to make sure everything's crafted correctly. And the second one, you'll do a little bit more. The third one, you'll realize that like you may be starting to run out of ideas a little bit. And so how do you come up with something then? Still, do you keep on going? By number 4, number 5, you're kind of like, oh my gosh, is this really it for me or whatever? And then by the 10th to 20th, 30th post, everything gets easier, right? It's like, you know how to isolate ideas for content. You know how to write in a way that feels right for you. You've gotten over the pressure of like performing well and seeming sort of legit in front of the people that you know. What I find so funny about all this is that, again, this journey is exactly the same for every single person that posts. There is no exception. There's truly no exception. It doesn't matter what you're posting about, who you are, everyone goes through it. And so there's a little bit of like solace in that fact, right? It's like some people, especially in my circles, a lot of people are very like, they're more corporate types. And they're like, oh yeah, I just see like it works out so well for you. I want to do that for myself. But like, how do I get started? And I'm just like, write something, just press post. And they're like, I don't understand. And I'm like, literally, like, write what's on your mind. No, it's going to suck. No, it's not going to get any traction. It's not going to get any likes, but you put something online and then you move on to the next one. And that's it. And it just takes a while for them to like really, really get that. But then everyone who has ever posted content consistently for over a period of time will tell you the same thing.
Especially when it comes to content, but also when it comes to building and wanting to get into startups. I think you have to go in with a mind of you just can't care what people are going to think and say about you. And I think that's been an important thing for me to overcome over the past few years as I've gotten into content and as I've gotten into startups, because when you take that first step, no one's going to understand. You might not even understand what you're doing. And it's going to be hard to explain to people what you're doing. And I think a lot of like founders probably in their early stages go through this, which is like that moment when someone says, hey, like, what are you up to this summer? Or like, what are you doing when you graduate? And they're like, well, I'm like trying to build this thing. And it sounds like I'm unemployed, or, oh, this is like a fun little kind of side project I've been working on. And it seems like no one will really take you seriously until you have actually had a certain level of success. And I think that's a really daunting thing to approach, especially when there are a lot of forces within college as an institution and within like the workplace for people in their 20s of like, you are compelled to go and work a certain type of job with a certain salary because that's what everyone else around you is doing and that's what everyone is telling you to do. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing those things. But I think going into startups, you need to set aside everything about what other people might think or say about you. Just kind of like go and do the thing. And I'm still learning a ton of things every day.
And taking that first step with a co-founder makes it much, much easier. You have someone on your back. But you guys mentioned, Pete, you said you guys are 10 years apart. And I feel like that's, not the most normal thing when it comes to co-founders. How do you think that plays to your strengths?
There's a thing that happens with experience, which is like you gain a little bit more content expertise and domain expertise. But sometimes in some cases, you know a little bit too much. What ends up happening is certainly like I can bring all my experiences in startups and serving small businesses and advising corporates and like all these different things. And there's like a way of communication that I've developed over the years and all those sorts of things. Sometimes though, it's like you overanalyze and we'll be talking through an idea and, just the act of like explaining it or kind of exploring it with Noah, you come to the conclusion that it's just like, well, you just got to go do the thing. Or like, here's like maybe a simpler answer along the way that like, maybe you don't need to overanalyze as much. You're right. Like I don't know too many co-founder relationships with this particular dynamic, but it's useful, right? Like there's a certain amount of like energy and sort of going at it about things that like you lose a touch of that over time.
I think the biggest thing for me that I've appreciated about working with Pete is I come into our discussions and this whole thing of building something with a lot of ideas and a lot of energy. And Pete has helped me frame those ideas and energy in a way that actually makes sense when it comes to business building. So for instance, last week, I came to Pete with a new kind of format idea on a type of AI explainer content that I want to explore. And I was really excited about it. And what Pete helped me figure out was, where does this fit in from a business model perspective? Him having that business experience and strategic experience throughout his various roles over the last decade, it's helpful for me to kind of very quickly have that information transferred to me so that I can think about building this business in a way that's a little bit more structured and where I can ask the right questions when it comes to actually implementing the ideas and energy that I have.
People listening to this, they might think, wow, you guys both got it right. You have a very successful newsletter. You just launched a very successful podcast. But talk to me about the times that no one really sees, right? Like the hard times, the thoughts when you like, maybe this is stupid. We should stop this. That's what I really want to understand. What were those moments?
The times where I've had a really long day and I might have other things to do, other things I want to do, and I haven't even started the newsletter and nighttime is approaching and I'm tired and I don't want to do the thing, but I just have to force myself to do the thing because the hard, fun, and interesting thing about content is it's a constant production of new things, especially when you're reporting on the news. And so there are a lot of days where I just don't want to do it and I'm tired and I'm frustrated. And most days are not like this, but on those days where it's getting late and the time where we need to publish is approaching, I sometimes feel like I don't want to do the thing, but I have to force myself to stay consistent and really just crank it out. I think there is a certain amount of struggle behind producing content so frequently that most people might not know about, but ultimately it's very rewarding and enjoyable for me. And so that's why I do it.
If you run a newsletter, especially a daily one, you made a promise to the reader that you're going to ship every day, basically. And the actual operations of figuring out how to deliver that at the quality that you want is freaking hard. You know what I mean? Like, put it in other words, like from a business model perspective, this level of effort is status quo, right? Like there have been newsletter operators that have stopped because they're like, look, we're tired. Like, we are just tired. Of course, there's always hard moments. I think for content specifically, Noah, how many newsletters have you written at this point?
400.
Yeah, it's somewhere in the 300, 400 range. 300, 400 emails. Each one we're targeting anywhere between 700, 800, 900 words sometimes. You do the math on how many words that you've written, right?
It's books.
Yeah, so for like a daily newsletter operator, it's kind of like you're signing up for that, right? And that is the thing that you're doing.
Was there any one moment, one event where you're like, oh my God, this might kill the Neuron?
There have been moments where I've questioned whether or not we're doing things the right way. Yes. Like a lot of the growth for these newsletters have come from organic social media. Like a lot of the social media that we did early on is through my account, right? And when you look at some of the social media that's been put out to promote these other newsletters, highly templatized, sort of algorithm optimized content that reads like a total NPC, right? And they do it every single day. And it's like, for some people, you see the feedback on Twitter where they get super annoyed at them, all this kind of stuff. And despite being over a year into content creation at that point, I still had those moments where I was like, I let my fear of being seen as cringy among the SF and tech Twitter types that follow me or that I'm here, in SF interacting with, I let my fear of their potential judgment get in the way of me writing that same content. Ultimately, that content produced results. I mean, there are some of these tactics that literally created 400,000 newsletter subscribers for some people out of thin air, basically, right? But in the moment, it is very painful to think about, okay, I'm going to post this deeply cringy thing and get blocked by a lot of people. and then go introduce myself at a party with a bunch of tech people and say that I'm that person? What are they going to think about me? Like, do they think I'm dumb? Do they think I'm not working on important things? Like, there are all these sort of like things that carry around that. So there are those moments where I'm just kind of like, I think in retrospect, in those moments specifically, we as a brand ended up not doing things and did not take advantage of certain growth levers that worked remarkably well for these sort of soft feelings, right? And it has nothing to do with the business or anything like that. It's more of just, it was my personal Twitter account and I was afraid of what people were going to think of me sometimes, And there are those moments where I'm like, yeah, was that actually the right move? But I've just gotten over it.
What are those tactics?
In May or June of last year, and I posted a thread that was like, okay, tons of announcements. Here's the roundup of like big announcements from like, there's one from Meta, from Stanford, from whatever. And there's like a curation of a thread and that like popped off. There's another a competitor of ours, coincidentally, the very next day started posting that exact same format. And I didn't want to do it again because I was like, I just did that. Like I just used that content template. Like I can't do it again. I mean, the guy proceeded to rip that thread format every single day for the last year. So credit to him. He saw a format that worked. I originated it, but he took it for the next year. And as a result of that, he like reached 500,000 Twitter followers, right? And I did not, because I didn't choose to kind of continue with that. So it's like those moments where I got the content right, got the content idea right, but it was just like the repetition of it and the willingness to be that guy with that template did not let me reap the gains, I guess, of like the full benefit of that.
My last question that I ask everyone that comes on, since you started the Neuron, has there been any personal routine that you've maintained?
Daily meditation practice. Something I've been doing since later years of high school, but something that I've tried to go deeper into over the past year and a half or so. There are still times where I feel stressed and anxious, and meditation, mostly mindfulness meditation as a practice, has helped me expand my perspective in those moments and also overcome difficult feelings, I think. So
Mine is a lot more simple. When you're doing this type of thing, you interact with, and when you're out of college, you just meet way less people organically, right? You don't have a workplace to go to. You don't have an office to go to with a bunch of teammates that are going to be interacting with you. I remember, the first startup I joined, we were 15 people when we started. And when I left, of course, it was during COVID, but like there were north of 1,000 people at the company. It's like there were 1,000 people in your life now, right? Like that you could have talked to and spent time with. And now, over the last year, there were moments where I was like, man, like, I don't remember the last time I like met someone new. There was at least one moment where I was like, I don't think I've left the house in the whole day, basically, when you're working at home and just like online all the time. So it's like, it's really as much as it's like a very classic sort of just take care of yourself type of thing, right? But it's like go on walks and go reach out to your friends and go like schedule some time and go meet new people and all that kind of stuff. So just building the time and energy to go do that, I think has been important too.
Noah and Pete, thank you for joining me. And with that, this has been UNinvested.
Thanks for having us, Sahil.
Thanks for coming. This is a personal video. Any views or opinions represented in this video are personal and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations we may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. The views expressed are for entertainment purposes only and not to be misinterpreted as actionable investment advice.